Hello everybody, welcome to TCOM 101, Dr. Mike here. In this video I want to talk about something that happened in the 1950s called blacklisting, a real low point in American history that affected many people in the entertainment industry. Blacklisting. So what was blacklisting? Blacklisting was this phenomena that happened largely in the 1950s when a lot of people, especially those in the entertainment business, couldn't find work. Okay, they were accused of leaning towards communism or being communist or having friends who were communist, associating with communists, and as a result they could not find work. They were blacklisted. Their employment opportunities were denied. So how could something like this happen? It sounds a little bit crazy, but you have to consider the historical context. Blacklisting happened during something called the Cold War, which was a big part of the 1950s. This was the period after World War II of intense paranoia, hostility, confrontation between the United States and the former Soviet Union. Now, as a result, a lot of people were afraid that the communists would dominate America and take over America. So blacklisting really started with a focus on Hollywood and the film industry, and it happened in the late 1940s. In 1947, a special committee of Congress designed to protect America, called the House Un-American Activities Committee, called nearly 50 Hollywood people, writers, actors, directors to Washington, and they put them on the stand to answer questions about their political opinions and their alleged leftist leanings. Now, the Hollywood 10 absolutely refused to answer the committee's questions. They said, "This is America. We are entitled to hold our political beliefs and opinions without any fear of reprisal." Well, the Hollywood 10, of course, cited the First Amendment, which guarantees free speech and freedom of assembly, and they thought that that would legally protect them from refusing to answer the questions from Congress. But that tactic failed, and all 10 were sentenced to short amounts of time in prison for contempt of Congress for refusing to answer questions about their political orientation. Perhaps the most famous of the Hollywood 10 was a screenwriter named Dalton Trumbo. He was one of the Hollywood 10. He was blacklisted for many years. Now he, like others, continued to work clandestinely. He would produce work under pseudonyms or other people's names so he could continue his career. By the way, if you ever want to watch a story about Dalton Trumbo, watch the 2015 movie Trumbo, starring Bryan Cranston from Breaking Bad. And they tried to silence him, Dalton Trumbo, but he eventually made the world listen. But blacklisting in the Hollywood 10. Oh, here's a time to take a pause to remind you, wash your hands, practice that social distancing, avoid big crowds, and be kind to each other. Don't hoard toilet paper, please. Now, blacklisting also hit the radio and TV industries in the 1950s. A lot of people who worked in these industries were accused of being a communist or soft on communism. And of course, there was a lot of fear around the entertainment industry. Why? It was thought that the entertainment industry had the power to use propaganda to convince people to adopt views about communism. The blacklisting really started in 1950 when this little conservative, radical, right-wing group published a little pamphlet with a scary title, Red Channels, the report of communist influence in radio and TV. This little pamphlet had a big effect because it listed about 150 performers in radio and TV who were deemed to be communist or to have like-minded opinions or associations with a communist. And many of the people on this list, whether the allegations were true or not, they lost their jobs. They became blacklisted. Okay? And they were barred from working in their professions for years. Okay? If it was believed that they had any kind of leanings towards communism. Now, we need to talk about television, and two key figures here were Edward R. Murrow, the CBS newsman, and the Wisconsin Senator Joseph McCarthy. These are two of the key players in the blacklisting phenomena of the 1950s. So, McCarthy, we still use the term McCarthyism. That's kind of shorthand when people make reckless allegations or try and limit freedom of expression. Okay, even if it happens today, some people will say that's McCarthy-like. Well, who was McCarthy? McCarthy was a senator from Wisconsin, and he was out on the road doing speeches in 1950. And in a famous speech in Wheeling, West Virginia, he made charges of communist subversion in high government. He had a list that he wouldn't show anybody, but he had a list. And in that list, he claimed he knew hundreds of communists were working for the State Department in the highest level of government. Now, he had absolutely no evidence, yet people believed him. He was a demagogue. He knew how to use media, fear, lying, okay, to mold public opinion, and he used it as a way to gain attention and to gain power. So he ran around saying, oh, there's all these communists working in the high levels of government. Now, everybody caved. Nobody was willing to stand up to McCarthy. They were afraid if you challenged McCarthy, you'd be put on the blacklist. Okay. And most people refused to stand up until Edward R. Murrow helped bring down McCarthy. Now, Edward R. Murrow was a first-generation TV journalist from the 1950s, and still one of the most distinguished and renowned figures in the whole history of broadcast journalism. He is thought to be one of the patron saints of broadcast journalism. He was one of the few people who had the courage to go after McCarthy and expose him for what he was. So eventually he presented several primetime news programs on the CBS network in which he exposed McCarthy's claims as false. And he did a good job of bringing down McCarthy. Now, this went on in 1954 when television covered hearings in which McCarthy started to accuse members of the U.S. Army of being communist, or associating with communists. And he started to badger all kinds of people in front of Congress, asking them whether they had ever been a member of the Communist Party. Finally, after badgering and badgering some little people, one of his fellow senators looked at him finally in front of the TV cameras and said, "Have you no decency, sir? Haven't you gone far enough of reckless allegations without any proof?" Well, as soon as Murrow started to expose McCarthy for a fraud, public resentment built against him. He was eventually censured by the Senate, and he died, I believe, in his 50s of alcoholism. Now, all of this is put together in a terrific movie called Good Night and Good Luck. That was Edward R. Murrow's closing line, his tagline, Good Night and Good Luck. And this is a wonderful movie from 2005 that really tells the story. And I like the tagline, we will not walk in fear of one another, because the 50s was largely about fear. And most fear, is unnecessary. Now, could blacklisting or something like that happen again? Probably not exactly in the same way, but I would say yes. With the politics of fear, if people get fearful enough, certainly they'll be willing to blacklist. And today we still have a lot of anti-Muslim, anti-Marxist, anti-socialist rhetoric in our culture. So it wouldn't surprise me at all. Look at Colin Kaepernick. Ask him if he's been blacklisted. A couple of quotes from Murrow that I love and I think are so important even today. The first one, we must not confuse dissent with disloyalty. Just because somebody's criticizing the government doesn't mean they're disloyal or un-American. In fact, it might be one of the most patriotic things you can do is to voice dissent in an attempt to improve our democracy. Our country was based on dissent, okay? The other great Murrow quote is, we will not walk in fear of one another. And I believe that that's so true. I refuse, the best of my ability, to walk in fear, whether it's a pandemic or a political situation or whatever the fear and paranoia are all about. Try not to walk in fear, especially of each other. Fear is such a destructive emotion. All right, now as a reaction, I wanted to share this to round it off. As a reaction, there was another senator, Margaret Chase Smith. I believe she was from Massachusetts, but she couldn't stand McCarthy. And so her response to McCarthy was to do a speech in which she declared her Declaration of Conscience. And in this cool little speech, she identified basic principles for Americans to value. It says everybody in this country has the right to criticize. That's not un-American. Everybody has a right to hold beliefs, even if they're unpopular. Okay? Everybody has the right to protest, at least peaceably. All of this assumes that there's no violence involved. Everybody has the right to independent thought. And I would much prefer to cling to these basic principles set forth by Margaret Chase Smith, certainly, than to follow the prescriptions of Joseph McCarthy or anybody else who would use fear, okay, for their own advantage. Alrighty, that's all I've got for you in this video. Please continue to take care of yourself and each other and care about the entire community as we continue to cope with the COVID crisis. Okay, take care, everybody. So long.